Finally, it's time to release some Tempest content. And I've been playing around with tons of different essences and different set combinations, and I've also been trying out many different legendary gems to see the best combinations that works best for me. And after a lot of testing, I've realized that maybe not the newest essences are the most viable. But I have been trying to not watch any type of Tempest content whatsoever on YouTube, so just because I think it's fun to theorycraft myself. With that being said, some of these builds might be recognizable, maybe some other people are playing the exact same builds, I'm not sure. But today I'm gonna showcase you 3 different builds. I'm gonna first show you the highest DPS build, where I have the best results at the dummy. And then I'm gonna show you how I alter it a little bit for dungeons. And I'm also gonna show a second dungeon build that also works fine. And they are a little bit different. One of them is a little bit more single target DPS, while the other one is a little bit more AoE damage. So with that being said, let's dive straight into the first build, and we're gonna take a look at the dummy version. So first of all, we can take a look at the skills I'm using. As the primary attack, I'm using Wind Edge, but this will not be used at all because I will constantly have Roiling Surf active, which is in my first skill slot. In the second skill slot, I use Crosswinds. In the third skill slot, I use Squall. And in the fourth and final skill slot, I use Storm Fury. If we continue here, we can take a look at the essences, and I believe that this is kind of a staple for many builds, and this is in the helmet slot, Look Leeward. And what it says is that Squall now marks enemies for 3 seconds before it ruptures and slices through them, dealing damage equal to 28.5% of the damage you dealt by them to them while marked. And this is a very strong helmet. It's basically a 28.8% damage increase against the dummy. So we can try it out now once. You can see now under the health bar that whenever I use Squall, we can see this debuff here on the boss, and when it expires, I will deal a huge chunk of damage immediately. If we continue here, I'm using Slippery Shell, and what this does is that it increases the damage done whenever I use Squall, so nothing complicated. Here is maybe something that I have not seen many other Tempests use when I spec them, but I use the shoulder called Storms Without Number. And what it says is that Storm Fury now empowers only you, causing every 3 primary attacks to release a violent storm around your target, damaging and pulling in nearby enemies. But what's also good with this is that whenever we use this skill, we also get some extra primary attack speed, because we have some of these fixes here. Let me show you. I have 2 out of 4 on the Storm Fury fix here, that it increases my attack speed by 15% times 2. So I've not been able to optimize my setup. You will see soon how much damage I'm able to deal, and it's very high. But if I would work a little bit longer and try to find the correct items, I would probably be able to buff my damage even further. If we continue, I use Howling Anchor Pants, and what it says is that Crosswinds also cause enemies to bleed, dealing some extra damage for 5 seconds. And this is mainly useful. It deals a little bit of damage, but it also activates the Pain Clasp. And I have no other way except for the Roiling Consequence legendary gem to activate the Pain Clasp in this build. And the Roiling Consequence will not be active all the time on a target, almost all the time. But yeah, I put this in. I perform a little bit better with this pants compared to other pants. And yes, before I continue here, I can say that different essences might work best for different players, because how well an essence will perform compared to another essence is relative compared to what the stats of your setup looks like. For example, if you have very low attack speed, you will gain a lot of extra damage if you are able to increase your attack speed by 30%. But if your attack speed is already very high, then if you add another 30%, it will not have as great effect. So that's why one essence might work better for some people, while another essence works better for some other people. So it all depends on your whole setup. So just keep that in mind. If we continue here, in the first main hand slot I use Skein Potter. This is of course also a staple, and what it says is that Roiling Surf now empowers your edges, causing you and your Zephyr's primary attack to throw water daggers that return to you. While active, each use of a skill or primary attack grants you an additional dagger for each throw. So now you can see that whenever I use my primary attack while I'm under Roiling Surf, I'm throwing these boomerangs on the target. And this is very, very strong. And most of the damage in this build comes from Roiling Surf. If we continue and look on the first offense slot, I use Hurricane Hitch. And what it says is that Crosswinds now empowers your edges with wind, causing you and your Zephyr's primary attacks to unleash wind blades, damaging enemies. And this is of course also a staple, very strong. We can continue here and take a look at the second main hand, and it's called Shriekworth. And what it says is that Crosswind's critical hits causes 4 blades of wind to shatter off the target, dealing damage to enemies they hit. And this cannot occur more often than once every 0.5 seconds. And the awakening effect of this essence also gives the Crosswinds some extra damage, which is also neat, of course. I'm not even sure if this essence effect will deal any damage to the dummy itself, but the awakening effect makes it the best option for this slot. I've been trying out to switch it for something else, but this one performs best for sure. Finally, I'm using Sip of the Breath in the second offense slot, and what it says is that Mist-touched orbs also increase your attack and movement speed by 28.5% for 4 seconds. So this is very nice, because whenever I pick up one of these orbs, it will increase my attack speed. And the main reason why this is so useful is because then I don't really need 4 pieces of Vitus Urge any longer. And we can continue here and take a look at the set compilation I'm using for the dummy. So first of all, I'm using 4 pieces of Grace, and this is just because I will have a lot of ticks of damage on the target, so this is a very strong option. I also use 2 pieces of Baron, and maybe this is a little bit different compared to most Tempest builds. And the reason for this is that I have my familiar that will apply a lingering wounds effect. Let me show you quick. My familiar has lingering wounds that will add 38.8% armor break. And this will be prolonged by harmful effect duration. So it will be prolonged by potency, and it will also be prolonged by a 2 piece of Baron. So when I have 2 pieces of Baron, the lingering wounds will last longer, enabling me to deal a bit more damage. And I also use 2 pieces of Vitus Urge just to prolong beneficial effects. And yeah, this works for both the buffs and also for the legendary gem effects like Gloom Cask or Roiling Consequence and Bottled Hope, etc. We can continue here and take a look at my legendary gems, and we can see that I use Blood-Soaked Jade for some damage. I use Roiling Consequence for critical hit chance. I use Bottled Hope for some extra damage. I use Gloom Cask for a debuff effect on the target that will stack with the armor break, so very, very strong. And I have it at rank 6 here. I have some room for improvement. If I get it to rank 7, it will increase this effect where the enemy takes more damage. So yeah, I would try to get my Gloom Cask to rank 7 at least. And then I have Pain Clasp for extra damage, Fervent Fang for extra damage. I use Ship of Stone Flesh, and here's also some room for improvement because I have put the Wolfort as an auxiliary gem, so I get the rank 1 effect of the Wolfort. But of course, if I would be able to switch out the Ship of Stone Flesh for a quite high rank Wolfort, then I would probably deal a little bit more damage as well. We can also take a look here at the final gem. It's the Morn Skull. This is also just for extra damage, and I've been trying to switch this out for Berserker's Eye, and the results are similar, but I perform a little bit better with Morn Skull because this damage effect is a little bit higher than the Berserker's Eye, and I want to have as high damage as possible while all of these other gem effects are active. Because if you run the damage formula, that's always a good thing. So that's why Mornskull is very, very good. I only get 24% from it at the dummy, but in a normal situation, when there are other enemies around, I can get up to 36% extra damage. So a very, very solid gem in my opinion. So what I can also mention here is that I have not optimized yet. Like I mentioned, I have not been able to find 4 out of 4 of the Storm Fury fix. And also my charm is, it's for Crusader here. So there are definitely room for improvement. And I think that I could probably get close to the damage I deal with the Crusader if I were able to optimize the Tempest here. In the dummy build, I used the Slinger category, Paragon, and I used these 3 here at the top. I use Unseen Dynamis, I used Gifted, I used Uncanny, and then I also used Bloodthirst and Superiority. I've been trying out a lot of different versions, and this seems to perform the best for me in most of my dummy builds. Before moving on to the dungeon alterations, let us take a look at the dummy run, and you can judge for yourself what you think about the damage output. So what I always do is that I first use Roiling Surf, Crosswinds and Storm Fury before attacking, and then I use Squall. And then I just keep going, and I can keep using the skills whenever the cooldown is ready. And you can see that the damage goes up every 20 seconds. It starts ticking up because the familiar is once again applying the armor break effect. So that is very important. And this run I deal a lot of damage even though I'm not optimized. So I think that if I manage to do so and get some more Roiling Surf fixes and get some Storm Fury fixes, I will be able to maybe reach 2 billion damage as well with the Tempest. Here I also don't bring any of my friends to trigger the damage done per nearby party member that I sometimes do when I showcase the other dummy runs I've constructed. So anyways, 1.6 billion damage here, so it feels very strong. Yeah, so as we could see there, I deal 1.6 billion damage, and this is with a non-optimized setup. I was quite surprised that this shoulder performed so well. I would think that it would be more wise to maybe go for something else that allows me to summon more Zephyrs. But I guess it's the Storm Fury fix that brings it up to become this strong. I've been trying out many different shoulders, and no matter what I try out, this will be the best option for me. But it's possible that for someone else with different stats, maybe another type of shoulder would work best. So if we take a look at the dungeon build, and first we can take a look at the single target DPS dungeon build. It's basically the same core, almost. But if we go here, we can see that I no longer use Sip of the Breath. I instead use Marusi Spine. And the reason for this is because, this is also very strong because it increases the damage done by my Zephyrs. But I no longer use Sip of the Breath because in a dungeon you will be moving all the time, so it might be inconvenient to pick up the orbs from the ground. So therefore I switched in the Marusi Spine instead. And then I also use 4 pieces of Vitus Urge instead of using 2 pieces of Baron, because I used 2 pieces of Baron on the dummy because I wanted to prolong the armor break from the familiar. But in a dungeon, the most bosses will die before the armor break wears off anyways. So then it makes no sense to use 2 pieces of Baron any longer, and instead I use 4 pieces of Vitus Surge because this will give me more attack speed. We can also see here that I've switched in this other legendary gem here, the Abiding Curse. And the reason for this is because I want to activate the affix that increases my damage done to enemies suffering loss of control, because I have it on my Reforge. And I also enchanted my off hands and my main hands so that they have this affix. You can see here that I have 10% on both main hands. I have it on both off hands, and I also have it on my gloves, and this is a huge damage increase, not only on the dummy but also on normal mobs in the dungeons. So just some small minor details that makes the build a lot stronger. Other than that, the build is very similar. So yeah, we can take a look in the end. I'm gonna show you both a dungeon run of this version, and I'm also gonna show you a dungeon run with the other version that I'm gonna show you now. In the other dungeon build, I still use Wind Edge, but yeah, the same thing here. I'm gonna use Rolling Surf. It's gonna be up all the time, so this will not be used. But in the first skill slot, I use Rolling Surf. In the second skill slot, Crosswinds. In the third skill slot, Squall. In the fourth and final skill slot, I use Flowing Strike. So I no longer use Storm Fury. And here we can see that I still use the Look Leeward helmet because this is so strong against the boss. I still use the Slippery Shell for the damage increase, but now I use United Defiance Shoulder because whenever I use Flowing Strike, I will get an additional Zephyr. I also used Windswept Promise, and what this does is that it will increase my attack speed for each Zephyr that I control. I also use Skein Potter, it's still the same. I use Hurricane Hitch, which is also the same. I use Shriekworth, which is also the same. And finally, Marusi Spine, which is the same as my first dungeon version here. And as I said, I've not watched any Tempest content, but I've been spectating a few Tempests over the year that has passed. And maybe this is not a build that is anything special. Probably a lot of people has already tried this out. But yeah, this also works very nice for me. And the difference with this build is that instead of focusing a lot on single target DPS, I will summon a lot more Zephyrs. So whenever I use Flowing Strike, I get 2 Zephyrs and then I can teleport them wherever I want using Squall. So what I usually do is that before I engage, I first use Flowing Strike and then I jump in with Squall on the target. So this will deal a bit more damage in a huge area because you will have your Zephyrs spread out, and the first version is a little bit more concentrated damage in a single area. So in some situations the first build is a little bit better. I think that maybe if you want to speedrun dungeons, the first build performs a little bit better than this one, just because the single target DPS is a little bit higher, but maybe it's an even match between them. Before we move on and check some dungeon runs, let us also take a look here at the Paragon tree I'm using, and here it's the same for both dungeon builds. I use Fate, I use Blur, I use Ambush, and I use Honed Steel. I don't need Shackle, so I use Quickstep that will reduce the cooldown of my dash skills by 10%. And these are all in the Harbinger category. It's a very strong Paragon option for dungeons, because you will constantly have 30% damage increase and 20% critical hit chance increase. So there is nothing that can beat this. So whenever you have a dungeon build, you should try to find a viable dash skill so that you can use this Paragon setup. Let's take a look at dungeon builds in action as well, and we're going to start by looking at a run using the first setup, and then we're also going to take a look at a dungeon run using the second setup, where I'm also going to explain a little bit how I play the build. And yeah, I hope that you enjoy it and that you have fun if you try these builds out. So here we found ourselves in Tomb of Fahir, and what I like about this build as well is that you can teleport through walls like I just did there. And compared to some other dungeon builds, I can't really deal a lot of damage while I'm moving, so this is very strong for single target damage, but I'm not gonna destroy everything as I run past it, as I usually do with a Crusader, for example. So the damage output in the whole dungeon will go down a little bit, but you can see that the damage I deal to a single target is super high, and this means that we will finish the dungeons very fast. So in some dungeons like Tomb of Fahir here, for example, we will deal a bit less damage if we look at the DPS meter, but maybe that's not the most important thing. We want to be able to finish the dungeons as fast as possible to get as many green items as possible, and that's why this build is so strong. So yeah, you can see we could take down the bosses super fast, and what really makes a huge difference here is the helmet. I would say that this is probably one of the strongest essences in the game, because that extra burst you get after 3 seconds has passed after using Squall is massive. And yeah, this is of course useful against any type of boss target or in a raid or anything similar. The only downside of this build is that we deal a little bit less AoE compared to some other setups, and we will take a look at the other dungeon version soon. But here at the elevator, for example, we have to kill one side at a time, and of course now we're maybe talking about a second that we're losing the most. But if you run hundreds of dungeons, after some time these seconds will add up. So my philosophy is that I always try to optimize as much as I can, because if I can scrape off 1 second from each element, and there are 20-30 different elements in a dungeon, then I can run each dungeon maybe 30 seconds faster, and then it's a lot if you add it up, if you grind for new essences and new items and stuff like this. Also, it's fun to challenge yourself, of course. Here we can see the other dungeon build, and we are in Namari, and maybe this dungeon is a little bit better to showcase this build, because here we are fighting in rooms where we have to kill off the mobs fast in a little bit of a bigger area. And what you will see me do is that I will often use Flowing Strike before I engage with Squall, so that all of my Zephyrs are exactly where I want them to. Like here, for example, I use a dash first with the Flowing Strike, and then I jump in with the Squall. And if you compare now the damage meter with this build compared to the first build, and of course there are 2 different dungeons, and we have some different fixes here in the dungeon as well. But this build will generally deal a little bit more damage on the damage meter, but a little bit less damage on the bosses. So yeah, it depends a lot on the team you're running with and what your stats look like, what should be the best option. But both of them are fun to try out, so yeah, both are super viable. And also you can see here, of course, now we have our teammates as well that helps us out a little bit, but the bosses go down super quick with both dungeon versions. So it's, yeah, really hard to tell which one is the best. But yeah, I really hope that you liked all of these builds. Maybe there were some new information that was not known to you before. So feel free to ask any questions in the comment section. And until next time, I want to wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening wherever you are. And to all of my clan members in Nyx, I would also like to say Voruk Nyx, Sholak Sol. So, bye bye!
If a boy or if a girl, subscribe to Aura's channel. Let him take you to his world. Subscribe to Aura's channel. The best choice you will ever make. Subscribe to Aura's channel. Hit the bell, a piece of cake. Subscribe to Aura's channel. Let me tell you one more time. Subscribe to Aura's channel. All the answers you will find. Subscribe to Aura's channel.